Hi there. In this video, I am going to go through how to do each question in the practice test. So hopefully if you get stuck, you can follow along. I highly encourage you, don't just watch the video and copy every step that I do. You need to make sure you understand it for yourself so that you can do it on your own. So here we go. The first thing that we learned how to do is add and subtract quadratics, and then I recommended that you line up your place values just like you would in elementary school when you added decimals. We have x squareds, x's in constant number terms. So this would be 5x squared minus 3x plus 9. And then I am subtracting 8x squared minus 1x plus 12. Now that I have all my like terms lined up, just like you lined up decimal places in elementary school, you can, you add your like terms. So this is an add. I don't know why I said subtract. You should be adding them. 5x squared plus 8x squared is 13x squared. Negative 3x plus negative 1x is minus 4x. 9 plus 12 is 21. You can't combine any other terms because they're not like terms. You are done. 3x squared minus 4x plus 21. Sliding over to the second one. Similar type of thing. We are doing subtraction though. We have our x squared column, our x's in our number column again. I have 1x squared minus 5x plus 7. This one is subtraction, subtracting 8x squared minus 4x plus 11. You need to be careful with subtraction because most people subtract the first column, but they forget they're subtracting everywhere else. 1 minus 8, that is going to make negative 7x squared. Negative 5 minus a negative 4. Minus a negative is like plus, so this will be like negative 5 plus 4. That's going to make minus 1x. 7 minus 11 will make minus 4, and then you're done. Negative 7x squared minus 1x minus 4. After we learn how to add and subtract, we talked about multiplying. We call it finding the product. So we do it with distribution. If there's just one term to distribute, then you just distribute one term. There's technically a 1 in front of this. 2 times 1 makes 2. Y times y squared is y to the third power. You add your exponents when you're multiplying like that. Distribute the 2y to the 7y. 2 times 7 is 14. Y times y is y squared. So 2y cubed plus 14y squared. Over here we have a binomial times a binomial because there's two terms in each. Those are each called binomials. So it's a double distribution. So I first distribute the 2x. 2x times 3x. 2x times 3x is going to be 6x squared. 2x times minus 3 is minus 6x. Then the 4 distributes. 4 times 3 is 12 x's. 4 times 3 is 12, and then 1 times x. And then 4 times minus 3 will make minus 12. And then we need to combine our like terms here in the middle. We have 6x squared. Negative 6x plus 12x is going to be, there we go. It's going to be 6x and then minus 12. If you want to, you can do a table instead of doing double distribution. 2x plus 4 and 3x minus 3 would make 6x squared minus 6x. Then positive 12x and minus 12. You combine your like terms right here in the middle, you're going to get the exact same answer. 3x plus 11 squared. To square something means to multiply it by itself. You cannot take a shortcut here. You cannot just do 9x squared plus 121. It doesn't work like that. You have to multiply it out. Again, I'm going to use double distribution. 3x times 3x is 9x squared. 3x times 11 is 33x. Then you need to distribute the 11. You get another 33x. Then distribute the 11 again. You get 121. Combine your like terms in the middle, and you get 9x squared plus 66x plus 121. You could use a table as well. Last one, x plus 12 times x minus 12. I'm going to do this one with a table. If you want to do double distribution, you can. X plus 12, x minus 12, I get x squared minus 12x. 12 times x is positive 12x. 12 times negative 12 is minus 144. These middle terms are actually going to cancel out because 12x minus 12x is 0x, so I get x squared minus 144 for that one. That was multiplying. Then, after multiplying, we saw the very beginning of division. When we do division, we actually do the distributive property backward. We divide out what we call the greatest common factor. So if I look at 4 and 18, what's the biggest number that goes into 4 and 18? It's a 2. Then I look at the x's. This has 4 x's, this has 2 x's. What's the most amount that I could divide out of both? It's x squared. I'm going to have some things left behind, though. And so here's really kind of the question that we're asking. If you want to think about it like this, here's my original. What needs to be in here so that when the 2x squared would multiply back through, if I were checking it, I get the original problem? Well, I can see 2 times what would give me 4. 2 times there has to be a 2 left. This had 4 x's. I divided 2 of them out, so there still has to be x squared left behind, so that when I distribute the x squared times x squared makes x to the 4th. What needs to be here so that it'll make 18? Well, 2 times 9 will make 18, and there can't be any extra x squareds because there's already x squared distributing here, and that only has x squared. So this is your final answer. You can check by actually distributing and seeing that you get the original problem. That's what we call factoring out, because if you did distribution, that would be checking it. That would be the forward process. What about this one? Again, we do the numbers first. What's the most amount, or what's the biggest number I can divide into 2 and 6? What's the biggest number that goes into 2 and 6? It's 2. This has 2 x's. This only has 1 x, so I can only divide 1 x out. This has 1 y, and this doesn't have any y's, so I can't divide a y out of both, so I can't divide it out. So in parentheses, I need to write what's left behind. I'm thinking to myself, I need to make the original problem, so 2 times what would give me 2? Well, there has to be a 1. X times x would give me x squared, so it's a 1x for the first part. 2 times what give me 6? 3. X times 1 gives me x, and then this needs a y right here in order to get a y at the end, so it has to be a 2x, and then times a parenthesis 1x plus 3y. You would see the book write it like this, though, 2x. They usually don't put a 1 right there, it would just be x plus 3y, and that would be the final answer. After we did factoring with just 2 terms, we do factoring with 3 terms, and that's where you're going to have to find 2 numbers that multiply to make the last term and add up to be the middle. So if I'm looking at this, what 2 numbers are going to multiply to make 6 and add up to be 5? There's only 2 numbers that multiply to make 6 that are both positive, 1 and 6, and 2 and 3, but 1 and 6 add up to be 7, so it can't be that, it's got to be 2 and 3. So this will be x plus 2 and x plus 3. You can either check by doing double distribution or by multiplying out, making a table. I'll show the table just once and assume that you can do it for the rest. But x plus 2, x plus 3, x squared, 3x, 2x, and 6. Look, these add up to make 5x in the middle and multiply to make 6 at the end. So the factoring is x plus 2 times x plus 3. Over here, what needs to multiply to make positive 16 and add up to make negative 10? We'll realize if they multiply to make a positive, they either both have to be positive or both have to be negative, but I can see since they add to be a negative in the middle, they both need to be negative terms. So they're both negative, so negative 1 and negative 16, negative 2, negative 8, negative 4, negative 4. You'll realize it can't be the first or the last. Those don't add up to make negative 10, so it's got to be negative 2 and negative 8 are my factors. X minus 2, x minus 8. I will leave you to check that for yourself by multiplying it through and realizing that you get that as your answer. X squared minus 10x plus 16. Last one is actually just like the one we did before, but you have a simplifying step. It's kind of a combination of greatest common factor factoring and normal factoring. Realize at the start that all of these are divisible by 2, so I can divide a 2 out. I can divide a greatest common factor of 2 out. So dividing a 2 out, I get left behind an x squared plus 10 divided by 2 would give me 5, 12 divided by 2 would give me 6. Now I just factor this inside part. What 2 numbers multiply to make 6 and add up to be 5? It's got to be 2 and 3. So there's still a 2 in your final answer. It still has to be out front because it would have to multiply out front to make 2x squared. I would get x plus 2, x plus 3. It doesn't matter the order in which you write these. You could write x plus 3 and x plus 2. Either one of those is fine. These are both the same answer. So just realize that. There we go. That's the first page. Back part doesn't have as many questions, but you're just applying kind of what you did on the bottom part of the first page. So can you solve once they're factored, or can you factor and solve them? So this one's already factored, so we could be able to solve it pretty quickly. I've got green thing times purple thing equaling 0. One of them has to be 0. Either x plus 1 equals 0 or 2x minus 6 equals 0. Subtract 1, I get negative 1. So over here I have to add the 6 over to the other side and then divide by 2, and I get negative 1 or 3 are going to be my answers. There's always going to be two answers for quadratics typically, because you're going to have two x-intercepts for the ones that we're looking at so far. In 13 is actually very similar at heart to what was going on in 7 and 8. You have to do greatest common factor factoring first, and then you can solve. What's the biggest number I can divide out of 5 and negative 20? Well, it would be a 5. What's the most amount of x's I can divide out? This has 2 and this has 1, so I can only divide 1 out. And what's left behind? Well, there's a 1x and then a minus 4 in order to multiply back and make the original. So here's my two factors. I've got blue thing times green thing equals 0. One of them has to be 0, so either 5x equals 0. If I divide both sides by 5, I'm going to see x equals 0 would be one of my solutions. Over here, this is just x minus 4 equals 0. If I add 4 to the other side, I get my other solution. So my two answers are 0 and 4. Last one is one where you actually need to factor it for yourself. This is really x squared minus 1x minus 12. Because it's a trinomial, you have to do factoring by finding two numbers that multiply to make the constant term and add up to make the middle term. If they multiply to make a negative, you know that they're opposite in sign. So you have one positive and one negative factor. And we need to have them add up to make negative 1. And so if you search, you're thinking either like 12 and 1, 2 and 6, 4 and 3. 4 and 3 are only one apart, so it's going to be those. Minus 4 and plus 3 are going to be your solution. Minus 4 plus 3, if you add them, make negative 1. If you multiply them, they make negative 12. Now you can solve. Green thing times purple thing equals 0. This thing would become 0 if x equaled negative 3. This one would become 0 if you add the 4 over, and you get x equals 4. So your two solutions are negative 3 and 4. Then, once we knew how to factor and solve by factoring, we applied that to graph some quadratics. So if I wanted to graph this following quadratic, I have to find the x-intercepts, also known as the zeros, and then find the vertex and the y-intercept. So factor first, because factoring allows me to know when y is going to be equal to 0. So x squared minus 3x minus 4. What two numbers are going to multiply to make negative 4 and add up to be negative 3? Those numbers are going to be minus 4 and plus 1. Once you have it factored, you can answer the question about what the x-intercepts are. This one would become 0 if x equaled 4, and this one would become 0 if x equaled negative 1. So your two x-intercepts are going to be 4 and negative 1. Another name for x-intercepts are zeros. How do you find them? You find them by factoring. So 4 and negative 1 are your x-intercepts. Zoom this out just a little. Once you have your x-intercepts, your vertex is always located halfway in between them. How do I find halfway in between? I add the two x-intercepts together and divide by 2. It's an average. So the vertex's x-coordinate is going to be the average. 4 plus negative 1 divided by 2. That's going to make 3 divided by 2, and that's 1/2. So my vertex's x-coordinate is going to be when x is 1.5. That's also where the axis of symmetry is going to be. If you wanted to sketch it in there, you would see that is halfway in between. Now, how do I find what the y-coordinate is? You plug it in. That's how you always find the y-coordinate. You put 1.5 in for x in your equation. 1.5 squared minus 3 times 1.5 minus 4. And then you just simplify. You do order of operations. 1.5 squared minus 3 times 1.5 minus 4. And you get a value of negative 6.25, negative 6 1/4. So it'll be right down here is where your vertex is going to be located. The last part is the y-intercept. If you're a y-intercept, your x-coordinate is always 0. So if you put 0 in for x in your equation, here's your original equation, you'll realize a lot is going to cancel out. You'll get 0 squared minus 3 times 0 is going to be minus 0, and then minus 4, that'll make negative 4. So your y-intercept is negative 4. your y-intercept is actually always going to be that last term. Now that you have 4 points, you technically actually have 5 because you can reflect and get this over here. Then you can just sketch in what your graph should look like. It'll look something like that. So that's how you can graph by factoring. 16 is a almost identical process. There's just a -1 out front that you have to divide first. So you divide a -1 out, everything will switch signs and become x squared minus 3x, then minus 4. Then you go through the same process. Find the x-intercepts by setting equal to 0, and then factoring. We'll realize we actually just did this whole process over here. There's x squared minus 3x minus 4. So it's going to be -1, x minus 4, x plus 1. Your two x-intercepts are going to be 4 and -1 again. There's just going to be one difference about how this graph turns out. So plot those again. 4, -1. Average is going to be where the vertex's x-coordinate is going to be. If I add 4 and -1 together and divide by 2, I get 3/2, which is 1.5 again. If I put 1.5 into the equation, though, this time, I'm going to get a different answer. I'm actually going to get positive 6.25. So it'll be up there. And then my y-intercept is positive 4 this time. Realize this graph is going to open downward, and I could have known that from the get-go, that point right there, because there's a negative out front. So actually this second graph is the exact same as the first graph, just reflected across the x-axis, because there's a negative out front, so it opens downward. And that's it. Last part I should say, y-intercept was 0, 4. That's it. I hope this helped, and then if you have any other questions, reach out to me. Thank you very much. Have a good one.